This is the microphone. The pom-pom, I don't know, maybe it diffuses like the pee, I don't know. Okay.
U.S. hours, so I work in U.S. hours, so it's the nighttime.
Oh, U.S. hours, yeah.
Okay, so it's the 8th of Tevet, and we are concluding chapter 8 today, B'ezrat Hashem. So this chapter, if we want to give it a name, what should we call it? Let's see how Miller refers to it. He refers to this chapter as negative energy 2. Right, because last chapter also we were learning about an animal soul and stepping into the animal soul's negative energy, right? What that looks like, what there's better and there's worse, as the Alter Rebbe said, right? There's the Klipot Noga dimension, there's the Klipot Tumeot dimension, all negative energy, one worse than the next. And we've really been looking at these various possibilities, various categories of negativity that a person could, God forbid, lean into. And along with looking at what that looks like, we also looked at what the repair looks like, right? And together we really get a sense for the damage, right? When we see how much repair is needed to heal, we also get a better sense of how much damage has been done. So that's really what we've been learning the past few days, and we continue with this learning today as we bring the chapter to an end, B'ezrat Hashem. And in fact, it gets worse, right? I go like this because it's all bad, but it gets worse in terms of the negativity, and specifically in comparison to yesterday. So, whereas yesterday we were focusing on indulging in matters of the permissible, and we spoke about chibot hakever, which is the trace, which is the consequence, right? The way that Hashem, right, deals with the residual, the trace, the effect that's left on the body, even after tshuva has been done, even after the sparks have been potentially elevated, but the impact doesn't completely go away of the food that was eaten, right? Specifically, food that was eaten for negative purposes. And again, when we say negative, we mean non-holy purposes, right? Not in a connection with Hashem. And so we spoke about chibut hakever, and we'll continue from there today to learn about other indulgences, not food specifically, but other ways that we can indulge, not for the sake of Hashem, and what that consequence looks like, meaning there's also a trace that's left that has to be dealt with. And specifically, we're talking about indulging in, I'm using the word indulging, right? But indulging usually we use for food, but really for any temptation, right? Indulging in idle chatter, dvarim v'telim. Indulging in speech, just because, right? So we have indulging in food, just because. And now we're talking about indulging in speech, just because. Why am I saying indulging? Because it's for the self. Because if it's not for God, then it's for self. So it's indulgence. It's for the sake of self-interest, self-preservation. Who knows what motivation is motivating us to just speak idle chatter. Stam. So what the Alter Rebbe is differentiating here is what be'emet is this category of idle speech, where the only thing against us is that we're speaking words without connection to Hashem. And there's nothing else under the surface. What else could be under the surface? Right, so that's actually another category. That's next here today too. Bitul Torah. Right, so for the offense to be simply, right, a klipa noga sort of offense of idle chatter, it presumes that there's no simultaneous obligation that one is holding to be engaged in Torah speech. If you think about it, do we have permission to just freely chatter? Now, if you're a woman, maybe you can argue that yes, right? But now Alter Rebbe doesn't talk about women, he talks about men. Some men, yes. When? If you don't have the obligation to be engaged in Torah 24 hours. Because the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, right, is sort of the obligation around Talmud Torah is sort of has a sliding scale to it, right? You guys are familiar? Right? We have a mitzvah, V'yigita b'yomam v'layla, right? It's a time-bound mitzvah, so it's for men specifically, right? Women, we can have our own farbrengen around where this meets us, but that's less the point right now, right? So men have an obligation to study Torah all the time, right? And in the halakha, the discussion is bemet, all the time. Well, then how will I earn a living, right? Or what about a person who's just mentally not capable of studying Torah all the time? He's not able to. He doesn't have the literacy to be able to study Torah all the time. So he doesn't have to. Again, we don't go through all the details of the discussion, but Alter Rebbe refers to it assuming we know that it's a sliding scale. In other words, there are some men who bemet have the obligation over them all the time to be engaged in Torah. And if this such a man, right, from this category, is busy speaking idle chatter, he's not just in the klipat noga realm of speaking stam. He's also neglecting Torah study. That's even worse. Okay, again, so we'll learn inside and we'll see these various possibilities. And as we're learning, we're uncovering the extent of possibility around how we can give into the negative energy of the animal soul. And like we said, there's there's bad and there's worse, right? And so we introduce another consequence. We said chibut hakeva yesterday. We add today kafakele, which is the consequence for stam words. So long as you don't have another offense on your hands, specifically the obligation to be learning Torah. If we also neglect the Torah, we have to deal with that as well. That's not kafakele. You can write them on the board. I should write them on the board. That's not kafakele anymore. That's gehenom. Straight up. But there's different kinds of gehenom.
What's Gehenom?
Yeah. There's different kinds of gehenom. Purgatory, right? So there's different kinds. There's Chaya, we've learned about this. There's the gehenom of fire. There's gehenom of ice. There's cold hell and burning hell, right? Right?
Yeah.
And it's meduyak. What does meduyak mean? A diyuk, meduyak, right? It's mida keneged mida, if you will. Meaning, if a person is engaging negative energy, sinning, right? Bringing their animal soul into expression. But the temperature, if you take their spiritual temperature, you'll find it to be cold. I'll explain more in a second. Then they need to go to Gehenom of ice, I don't remember the Lashon, but the cold Gehenom. Ken, shel sheleg, Gehenom shel sheleg, of snow. If a person is engaging their animal soul, negative energy, negative action, and you take the spiritual temperature and you see that they're hot, you know that they're going to go to Gehenom shel esh. They're going to go to the fiery, the hot Gehenom to deal with that, right? To get them clean, to get their soul clean. What do we mean when we say take their temperature and it's either cold or hot? So actually, like what's up? Are they in indifference? Indifference, apathy? That's cold, right? When would that show up? If a person is neglecting a mitzvah, right? We have a mitzvah of Talmud Torah. When I say we, again, I mean classically, right? Men, women, in whatever ways we do. Mitzvah of Talmud Torah, and this Jew is neglecting his obligation. You take his temperature, he's cold, he's neglecting. There's an indifference, there's an apathy, there's a lack of care and concern. A person is engaging lashon hara, like you mentioned earlier, which is also an example today, right? Not stam diburim, just talking about politics because, whatever. Like he feels like chatting. Right? His muscles in his mouth need some exercise, so He's going to chat about politics. Empty words, right? Empty words. He doesn't have an obligation to study Torah. So he said that's that's kafakela. Again, we'll go through these in details and I'll write it on the board. But now, a different scenario, he's not speaking stam words. He's speaking words that are forbidden. He's speaking lashon hara. Take his temperature, cold or hot? Hot, right? He's speaking lashon hara with a bren, right? It's burning inside his nefesh bahami. I'm gonna have to go to the Gehinnom shel Esh, I believe it's called.
Just superficial question.
Yeah.
So the body, the person is nifter.
Yeah.
The neshama is what goes through Gehenna.
Yeah.
But the neshama doesn't. How does the neshama feel? Physical.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow, manyan. So when we read it, we'll read inside what is chibut hakev, what is kaf hakele, and we've learned it together before a little bit, but it's an experience of the soul. That it's a suffering, it's a pain of the soul. The soul is suffering in kaf hakele, and we'll learn it. We'll read it. We'll describe it. And it's a spiritual experience. But the soul does, interestingly enough, and this comes up in other places, and it a little bit eludes me, talk about the soul embodied, but even in its disconnect from the body, it's still a created entity. It says it's affected by cold and heat. Do you remember seeing that? Elsewhere, it's in a different context. Talk about how the soul, it's in the context where we're differentiating the soul vis-a-vis the body from Hashem vis-a-vis the world. Because there's a mashal nimshal. This is in parentheses, just to answer your question. There's a mashal for Hashem as he fills the worlds. Mashal is the soul as it fills the body. There's a parallel. From Chazal, from the Gemara, there's parallel. But when we compare, right away we also contrast. And we explain that the soul is affected by the body. It feels. It describes that the soul experiences cold and heat. Those are the mashalim. Whereas Hashem, as you asked the other day, Hashem is affected by the worlds, right? No, the world is inconsequential to Hashem beyond the world.
But there is no goof at this point.
There is no goof, right? But it's a body. The soul has been, but it needs to yeah, nahon, but it's been affected by. It has these impacts. Yeah, at Rosham, and also it needs to be cleansed of because it's been affected. Where we was mentioning yesterday, it says that when the soul comes into the world, the hope, the prayer, is that the soul shouldn't get meluchlacht, shouldn't get dirty by being here. Not only should it not get dirty by being here, it should be able to go back as pure as it was when it came down, right? And not only that, but it should impact the kedusha level of this world. It should bring about increase of kedusha by means of its interactions. Right? At the very least, it shouldn't get dirty. It can get dirty, right? Because the soul is here and it's impressionable. I want to know more about that also, how it works, how this exchange works. I don't know so much other than it happens. But it's interesting, Dafka, we say cold and heat, and the Gehinnom is cold or hot. So there is an impact of it does feel, it does experience, and it is uncomfortable. But it's healing and it's cleansing. Okay, so I introduced the ideas, right? They're kind of here, but we have to learn it in an organized way and Zrat Hashem, understand all the pieces. Okay. Let me finish chapter 8. Which is I remember learning chapter 8 for the first time, and I was like, wow, what musar. This is so heavy. Gehinnom, growing up in Chabad, I feel like it was the first time I ever learned about Gehinnom. Because it's not the topic, it's not the, good morning, Modani, how's everybody doing? Have we earned any Gehinnom points since we saw each other last? That's not generally the conversation. And I was like, wow, this is really intense. And I was kind of shocked. Again, in my childlike self. I was like, wow, this is really, and but of course it's here. And the truth is, now that I'm learning it, and having learned it before, and having studied, more extensively Torah, it's actually very mild. It's like, in comparison. And it's important, as we've been saying, obviously it's important, but I don't know, I can speak for myself, but having this on my mind these past few days has been very, very helpful in focusing. Anybody share? Also feedback?
What is the idea of the length of the Gehinnom, the length of purgatory a person has to go
11
through?
months.
Right. He's saying, what is it about the length? As far as I understand, it's in relation to, it's, yeah.
But is there like a limit, considered a limit?
Yeah,
Some
well,
people say a year, so in the first year after
right,
death.
I think 11 months. 11 months. Al Rasha, 12 months. I think we saw that in Derech Mitzvotecha, at 11 months. Generally, but we say the extra month of Kaddish, I believe, because Al Rasha, 12 months. And we don't want to differentiate. Like, what if somebody knows that they're their loved one was evil, so they're going to keep saying Kaddish? That's not appropriate. So we all class, nobody should know, nobody should have to say Kaddish. We say, right, that it would be said for a year. But we were learning about Acher, Elisha ben Abuya, in Derech Mitzvotecha, and he, the teacher of Rabbi Meir, who left the Derech, right? He was in Gehinnom for years. And his teacher got him out. No, sorry. He wasn't in Gehinnom. He couldn't even get into Gehinnom. It's wild. It's like, again, wild. When I say wild, I just mean it's like a whole world of Torah. It says that he couldn't get into Gehinnom. Why? Because of all the Torah he had studied and taught. I mean, he started out really, really Talmid Chacham, right? He's the teacher of Rabbi Meir. Because of all the Torah, they couldn't judge him in the Beit Din Shel Mala. We're going to take this Talmid Chacham to court. Because of all the sins, he couldn't go into Gan Eden. So he's in limbo. Do you remember where you heard that day when you were studying? He's in limbo. What an awful place. And Rabbi Meir got him into Gehinnom. It's just like, awful to be in Gehinnom, but it's a gift at the same time. That was a part of the learning, of thinking like, Gan Eden is so, the context over there was to appreciate how Gan Eden is so pleasurable for the soul, that even though Elisha ben Abuya would have to be in Gehinnom and he had to be there for a long time, it's shavet to get him to Gan Eden. And then another sage, I can't remember his name, he got him out of Gehinnom and into Gan Eden. But it was a long time already, much more than 12 months. He got him out of Gehinnom and into Gan Eden. Before his time, before he had finished his allotted time. He was there but I'm just saying it was more than 12 months. So it's not, there's brought there, I think, a reference to 12 months for a Rasha, if I'm quoting correctly.
And for a regular soul?
So I think up to 11 months, right? But it could be less. I mean, some souls probably don't need to go into Gehinnom at all. We do tshuva, we have kapara here. When we learn Igeret Tshuva, we'll learn give tzedakah. There are ways to bring about, it's all to cleanse the soul, but the soul can get cleansed in this lifetime much easier. The cleansing, the opportunity to do teshuvah, and the kapara that will come, B'ezrat Hashem, from Hashem in response to our teshuvah, the chesed u'varachamim, is accessible here in this world, right? And much lighter on the soul and the person in this world than the Gehinnom, which the soul has to experience if we miss out on teshuvah and kapara in this world. Yeah.
The week that my sister passed away, I found on the street, like that week, like within a few days, a book about death and how, like the things you were saying, how different souls came back and asked the rabbanim and stuff to do mitzvah and their
Wow.
name to help,
Wow.
to
Wow.
help them to get out of it.
Right.
Right. It was
Wow.
amazing because I just found it that week.
Nachon, there are stories about souls, people that are kind of stuck, in between.
Yeah, that's
And-
what it talked about. And then they were asking their rabbis to do mitzvot in their name.
Can.
And stuff.
Wow.
And,
The
How
hope.
do they know that they struggling? You know.
It's sensitive. Sensitive souls have awarenesses that other souls don't. right? You know, they sense, they know, they're told. A dream.
How does that interact with the idea of Gelulim? The
Nachon.
souls come back to perfect themselves.
Right,
Like they
right.
have purgatory, or do they come back to
Right.
perfect themselves? Like how does that
Yeah,
interact?
yeah. Good question. Good question. Okay, let's learn inside and see what questions are lingering. Okay, so again, just to connect, segue from yesterday. Yesterday we learned about eating, right? Eating not for l'shem shamayim. After class yesterday, I got the most delicious breakfast that was made for me. And my friend, actually a surprise breakfast. And I was very hungry and I was learning while I was eating. And every bite I was like, Hashem, this is for you. This is so delicious. This is l'shem shamayim. This is l'shem shamayim. Because be'emet, we don't want to be eating not l'shem shamayim. So I was thinking about when they bake matzah, and they're like, l'shem mitzvat matzah, it's like constantly. Already it's a mitzvah, but just to bring, they're connecting in with the kedusha, with the mitzvah. It's like, this taste is so delicious, this pleasure is for you. Not for you that Hashem needs my pleasure, but it's l'shem shamayim, I'm connecting with you, Hashem. This is bringing me into my learning, into my presence, into simcha.
I don't know if this counts, but I found a week-old donut in the fridge yesterday.
And you ate
I
it?
thought, I have to eat it, but what could I think? It's a donut, so it's like, I don't want to waste food. It's there to throw away food. So I don't know if that counts.
Absolutely. Hashem, this is for you. I want to elevate the sparks in this food. It's a week old. It's legamre for you.
But you elevated something that was not nutritious.
But there's still a spark in there. It was a spelt donut. Okay, so we spoke about food, but there are other categories. Elishava, kind of as you were asking at the end, like you said, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, right? Did he, is it just food? No, of course, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi didn't indulge in anything. But the example was dafka about food. That's what we were learning about. So now we're learning about other indulgences, right? And when we say indulgence, we're dafka talking about ta'avat heter, right? Which is another term you can write down, right? A mutar, a heter, right? A mutar indulgence. Kosher, it's kosher. It doesn't have an X, right, written on it. It's not taboo. It's kosher. The question is just, what is your motivation, right? So ta'avat heter, motivation is ta'ava. Self-interest, right? I want it because it's what I feel like right now. So in this case, we're learning about dvarim betelim. I just feel like chatting. Because there's no holy reason why. It's just idle. Beheter, but it's mutar, right? Not mutar. It's not asur. Beheter, right? So again, if you're studying this, which we are, and we read dvarim betelim beheter, right away we're going to think to ourselves, hold on a second here. Mazeh beheter? A man has an obligation to be studying Torah all the time. How can he be dvarim betelim beheter? It's already asur, because he should be speaking Torah. The Lat Rabbi tells us we're talking about a situation where kegon am haaretz she'eno yachol lilmod. This could only apply, right? Dvarim betelim beheter could only apply to a man who doesn't have upon him right now the obligation to study Torah. Right? So as we said, there's a sliding scale to that obligation. For example, somebody who's an am haaretz, he's ignorant, he's not able to study Torah. And the Torah doesn't expect him to study Torah because he can't. He still has to fulfill his obligation by studying in the morning, studying in the evening, whatnot, right? He has to fulfill his obligation, but it's not all the time. And so the rest of the time, what's he going to do? He's going to talk. He's going to talk. So he's talking, but he's talking stam. Hu beseder or lo beseder? If he's talking stam. It's not a trick question. The answer should be obvious. The beseder is the lo beseder that he's talking stam. Lo beseder. Right? We can't do things stam. Right? That's what we really know when we finish these chapters. There's no such thing as spiritually neutral. Can't do anything batil, right? Just because, for no connected reason to Hashem, reason connected to Hashem. And so what's the consequence? There is a consequence. Something happened here, right? He engaged his nefesh ba'ami. Yornin, you missed a few days, but it's serious, right? It's geschmack to be a yid. Every single second is an opportunity to be in connection with Hashem, or the opposite. You're just chatting. you're not in connection with Hashem. Right? The animal soul is in its negative energy. And tzarich letaher nafsho. It's going to need to be cleansed. His soul is going to have to be cleansed from this experience. Mitum'ah zo, the klipa zo, right? Chaya, your favorite word. From the tuma, right? From the klipa. There's tuma here. There's impurity here. Because he's engaging klipa. Where there is klipa, there is tuma. I think we can say that. What's the cleansing? Okay, so we get introduced to another soul wash, right? We've got car washes and we have soul washes. So this soul wash is called kaf hakele. Kaf hakele. כמו שכתוב בזוהר, פרשת בשלח דף נ"ט. So what is kaf hakele? Very creative. No, stop. It's very intense, you can imagine. Let's read inside. Miller describes it really nicely and succinctly. In kaf hakele, the soul enters a world of imagination. A world of imagination. Why? Because it's thinking, it's perceiving, it is still alive in this world. It's not. But the soul enters the states of right, it's under the spell, so to speak, of it's funny words, but
I mean, it thinks it has a body.
yeah, it thinks it's still alive, yes, because and it is being drawn into the same inappropriate thoughts to which it had become accustomed. As the soul is flung, kaf hakele is like a, right, you translated it for us. Like a slingshot? A slingshot, yeah. The soul is flung from thought to thought. It's flung in the thoughts and out of the thoughts. And in the thoughts, in the idle chatter, out of the idle chatter, right? In and out of these moments that it lived through, that it not just lived through, that it vitalized. It experiences pain. It's horrible because it's already closer to the olam ha'emet. It's not like it was, and even here it's painful, right? But there it's even more. And it's also this threshing. It's this being flung in and out. And that is cleansing. That experience cleanses the soul of the thoughts as it gets flung in and out of them and experiences this pain and with the perceptions that it has. Okay. Kaf hakele, however, only cleanses the soul from permitted, meaning klipat noga, activities that were spiritually damaging. It will not cleanse the soul from actual sins. So just like we saw chibut hakever yesterday for eating, kaf hakele, you're done eating? I was like, we talk, people don't like to talk about people are eating meat. They don't necessarily like to talk about shrita, or whatever, stuff while they're eating. So when people are eating breakfast, they don't really want to talk about chibut hakever. It's like, I'm going to put my food aside for now. It's funny.
Does this only apply to the category of speech, or could it also be actions or thoughts that were...
It seems like it's... interesting. Wow, great question. Definitely the context here is speech and thought. I have to check. Yeah. Like actions that are neutral. It's only for, when I say, we all know there's no such thing as neutral. When we say neutral, we mean klipat noga. Okay, carrying on. We're still talking about speech, right? So the speech that is mutar, ta'avat heter, for speech brings us to kaf hakele, chas v'shalom. But then you have diborim asurim, straight up asur, right? This is prohibited speech. Right? When we say prohibited, we mean that it's asur, right? As we spoke a few times, it is bound, it is chained within the domain of the klipa, and you can't release it no matter what. So for example, what sort of speech is bound to klipa is asur? We gave an example, lashon hara. Another example is leitzanut, which is scoffing, mockery. Right? Yeah, if it's inappropriate, if it's hurtful. וכיוצא בהם, שהן משלוש קליפות הטמאות לגמרי. אין כף הכלא מועיל לטהר ולהעביר טומאתו מהנפש. רק צריכה לרד לגיהנום. Kaf hakele doesn't deal with that. Kaf hakele is too light. to deal with the klipat tmeot, right? It's a klipat noga. And also, carrying on to like the Gehenom, when the Gehenom is needed, right? So we opened today's Tanya with somebody who doesn't have to study Torah, and he's engaging in Batelim words. That's Klipat Noga. But we have somebody else who does have the obligation to study Torah, and he's engaging in just stam chatter. This is a sin, though, for him, right? Not Klipat Noga. So Gehenom, not Kafakele. En Kafakele levado me'ir lenafsho lemarka ulezachacha. Cannot effectively scour and cleanse his soul. Rak onashim chamorim shema'anishim bitul Torah bepratut. It must receive severe penalties, again, after, which are meted out for neglect of the Torah in particular. Neglecting Torah is a big issue. It's a big issue. It's very heavy. It has its own, it gets, if a person, okay, so here. מלבד עונש הכללי לכל ביטול מצוות עשה, מחמת עצלות בגיהנום של צדק מרוע מקום אחר. So if a person neglects a mitzvah, any mitzvah, right? Any mitzvah that gets neglected, purgatory of snow, as we said, right? Neglect reflects cold temperature, indifference. It's not a passion. It's a lack of passion. It's a coldness. But bitul Torah is like a bonus. In other words, neglecting Torah study is neglect of a mitzvah. But specifically neglect of Torah, which is a double whammy. It's a double hitter. It's like two birds with one stone. You neglected a mitzvah, and it's Torah. So it's even worse. Okay. So we're creating our, heavier. That's hard. Okay, so once we spoke about Torah and the obligation to study Torah / the neglect of studying Torah, even worse, it seems even worse, I think it's fair to say that, than neglecting to study Torah is that I'm not studying Torah and instead I'm chatting idle chatter. What am I doing instead? Here we have also in this chapter here a reference to engaging secular wisdom. You're studying, but you're not studying Torah. You're studying secular wisdom. When we say secular wisdom, we don't mean theology. We're not talking about studying klipat tmeot material. This is klipat noga material. But it's worse. It's worse than idle chatter. Okay, so again, you should be studying Torah, or not, either way. But specifically here, we're already moving on to somebody who should be studying Torah, so he has the neglect of Torah on his hands, and so he has Gehenna on his hands. And he's not studying Torah. What is he doing? Right? He's studying secular wisdom. Intellectual disciplines of the nations. He's guilty of neglecting Torah, and he's also guilty of engaging his mind with secular wisdom. So let's learn about that. It's its own category. ועוד זאת יתרה תומתה של חכמת האומות על תומת דברים בטלים. This is worse, the Alter Rebbe tells us, than stam idle chatter. Why? שאינו מלביש ומטמא רק המידות, יסוד הרוח הקדוש שבנפשו האלוהית. בתומת קליפת נוגה שבדברים בטלים, הבאים מיסוד הרוח הרע שבקליפה זו בנפשו הבעמית כדלאל. ולא בחינות חוכמה בינה דת שבנפשו, מאחר שהם דברי שטות ובורות, שגם השוטים ועמי הארץ יכולים לדבר כן. מה שאין כן, don't worry, it seems like a lot, but we've got it. מה שאין כן בחוכמת האומות הוא מלביש ומטמא בחינות חוכמה בינה דת שבנפשו, האלוהית בטומאת קליפת נוגה שבחוכמות אלו. שנפלו שמה בשרירת הכלים ובחינת אחוריים של חוכמה דקדושה כידוע ליודעי חן. Okay, so we have our godly soul and we have our animal soul. Similar structures, as we learned in similar powers, similar structures. When the animal soul is expressing itself, right, it's actually pulling along and contaminating that dimension of the godly soul that is coming along for the ride. In other words, the parallel elements of the godly soul. So, if the animal soul is in the driver's seat and the person is speaking idle chatter, klipat noga words, for whatever, whether he should be studying Torah or he shouldn't be studying Torah, the point is he's speaking these idle words. What aspect of the animal soul is, which element of the animal soul, which of the 4 temperaments of the animal soul is engaged? We have fire, air. Very good. Air is the element, right? That is the temperament that expresses itself in idle chatter, right? Like hot air, nonsense, empty words, empty content, wind. Wind is unrestrained, blow with the wind. It's just, kind of unrestrained and all over. So do these words are unrestrained, carefree. This is kind of like, spreading this carefree kind of unrestrained way. So that's the element of air of the animal soul. And so it's affecting, so it's pulling along the elements of air of the godly soul. Specifically, the Alter Rebbe says, the midot, right? The midot, and specifically the element of air, right? So air is connected to the midot of the godly soul, midot of the animal soul, the midot of the godly soul, specifically air. The midot are affected. That's not good, and there's a consequence. Damage has been done. But we can't compare that damage to a worse damage. When we're learning wisdom, secular wisdom, because to learn, right, we need to apply not just our emotions, not just our midot, but also the mind. Chokhmah bina dat. Before a second, I want to make another point before we say that Alter Rebbe says, how do you know that idle chatter is connected to the midot, specifically air, but the midot, and not chokhmah bina dat, because you don't have to be intelligent to be able to speak idly, right? Even Zalashon, like brute, how do you say, a bur in Am Haaretz, the ignorant fools and ignoramuses can speak that way, right? It doesn't require too much intelligence just to speak, to just chat. But to learn, right? To learn science, to learn math, to learn subjects of depth and sophisticated subjects, you better use your mind. If not, you're not learning, you're not understanding. So when we talk about engaging the mind, now it's a whole nother level of spiritual damage. Why? Why is it worse when we use our minds? Because, I want to read it inside here.
Because it's rational.
Because it's rational, right? And the rationale, like the kochot, our soul powers of reasoning, of rationing, are more sensitive and are more are meant to be protected from. They're more pristine, if you will, and they're more susceptible because they're more sensitive, right? Because they're higher level, they're more ethereal, right? They're closer to the soul. I'm going to read inside. The Chabad didn't fall. Again, it's deep. It's kashur to shvirat kelim. We'll read it inside, and we'll all together be like, whoa. They didn't fall. These kelim of chokhmah bina dat didn't fall quite as much into the rut of this world, into the rut of concealment, into the rut of materialism in the same way that the emotions did. And so they're higher level, right? If you think about it, your thoughts, your ideas are more you than the speech, than the words that we say and the speech that we communicate. They're closer to home. They're higher, right? They're more essential. So too our chokhmah bina dat, powers of our soul, are closer to our soul. There's more soulness in them. And to bring the Chokhmah Bina Dat down by enclothing it in secular wisdom that's not holy, that's not about God, is a worse offense. It's more damaging. We're damaging more. It's worse because we're damaging these dimensions of our soul that lo matim, lo shayach. And also the effect is more grave. Yeah.
But every morning when you wake up, you say, "Thank you, Hashem, for creating me with wisdom."
Mm-hmm.
So he's reminding you.
Yafeh. Yeah. Mamash, right? Natan the sachvi bina. Right? He gives the rooster understanding. Bina, right? There are kochot of chokhmah bina dat, our connection to Hashem. And to take those kochot and bring them down and entrench them in study that's not for Hashem. We're going to see in a second. We didn't end the chapter yet. We have a few lines that are important. But first, I just want to spend another minute on this and read to you these words that I have to be honest with you. I'm reading them together because I can't give them over myself because you'll see. But I do want to bring it into the room, even if I don't completely understand. Okay, so we said the chokhmah, the wisdom, secular wisdom, however, does influence and contaminate the intellectual faculties of chokhmah, bina, and data of your divine soul with the impurity of klipat noga in these forms of wisdom, right? As we said, there's a parallel. We speak idle chatter. We're in the emotions of the animal soul. We're damaging the emotions of the godly soul. We're using our minds to reason, to understand, right? But not connected to Hashem. We're damaging the chabad of our godly soul, which is meant to be connected to Hashem. And Chokhmah, as you said, is meant to be used to understand Hashem, to understand God's wisdom, to understand God's will. And we're taking it instead, we're understanding not kashur to Hashem. And so that downgrade, that contamination is why? Why is that so contaminating for the soul? Okay, so here's the Kabbalistic teaching that the Alter Rebbe evokes here to explain why it's so damaging for the soul. So we have to go into Kabbalah world. The Alter Rebbe tells us secular wisdom has fallen there. Secular wisdom has fallen to the realm of Klipat Noga through Shvirat HaKelim. Okay, so secular wisdom in its original point, where it originates from, all the way up there, right, is not yet obscuring Hashem. But as it falls down here, we have an obscuring. Okay, so here's this piece from Reb Chaim Vital about the shattering of the vessels. Ready? To fashion pottery, the potter first takes an unformed mass of clay and places his hands inside the mass to form it. Likewise, the supernal emanator, this is a quote, this is not Miller, this is a quote from Chaim Vital. Likewise, the supernal emanator, right, the Ma'atzil, Hashem, is emanating out of him, Atzilut, right, the emanator, put his hand, in quotes, what is the hand? A ray of light. That's Hashem's hand, so to speak, that he's emanating, right, into the amorphous mass. As this light began to enter the mass, vessels were formed. What vessels are formed? All 10 sfirot. All 10 sfirot are formed. With the light, right, entering into the mass and forming vessels. Just like the hand enters into the mass and forms a vessel, the light of Hashem enters into this mass of spirituality and forms 10 sfirot. Since Keter, crown, was the purest and clearest of all the vessels, it could bear the light within it. Keter doesn't shatter. But Chokhmah and Bina, the next two, right, though more translucent than those below, the vessels are more translucent of Chokhmah and Bina. They're closer to the emanator, right, the most refined, most translucent. But they're not like Keter. Not having enough capacity, their backs broke. Again, the backs of the vessels of Chokhmah and Bina broke, but not the front, just the backs. And they fell from their position. The backs of these vessels fall from their position. As the light descended further, the light, again, the light, meaning Hashem's hand, right? The light is coming into the mass, descends further. 6 points appeared, 6 fragments of what had been 1 point of light. Thus the vessel shattered. Their spiritual, it had been 1 point of light, right? But we have these multiple vessels, 6 fragments. The vessel shattered. Their spiritual essence, the light, ascended back to the mother's room. The light flies back up. What falls? We mentioned this not so long ago, right? The vessels fall. We were like, oh, interesting, right? It's the vessels that fall. While the shattered vessels fell to the world of creation. Okay, this is Miller now. While sacred in origin, the falling of these shattered vessels gave rise to the klipot. Right? So they're sacred in origin. It's light and vessel from so high, above, beyond. But the falling gave rise to the klipot, since the vessel fragments contained an overwhelming amount of mass. Remember mass? We have form and we have matter, right? The matter, the mass, is self-aware, klipa, right? The mass is, again, it's all spiritual. You have to just differentiate between light and vessel. The light is transparent, the light is batel, right? And if we're connecting these ideas, whereas the kli has a form, it has a sense, it has an identity, it has some sort of sense of self, recognition of self, self-awareness. So that the mass represents self-awareness, and so that falls here, and the klipot develop, and only a tiny glimmer of light, God awareness, within these fragments of the vessels. There's mostly self-awareness and a tiny glimmer of light. Therefore, earthly secular knowledge, which was a product of the shattered vessels of Chokhmah and Bina, has a propensity towards self and ego, because again, it's the vessels. It's the vessel, so the propensity is towards self, ego, and tends to contaminate the mind away from God consciousness, which is the experience. And if a person is engaging secular wisdom, the tendency is to move deeper and deeper into the sense of self and further away from Hashem, which is what actually happens most of the time. That doesn't have to be that way, but it's the tendency, right? It's the nature of it, because it's the vessels that are enlivening, this form, right? This matter, these subjects. But the shattering of the vessels affected only the backs of sacred Chokhmah and Bina, as is known to those familiar with the hidden Kabbalistic wisdom. One more piece and then we'll end the chapter. As the above citation makes clear, the shattering of the vessels affected different sfirot to varying degrees. While the vessels of the 6 emotional sfirot were shattered completely, the intellectual sfirot suffered a shattering only of their backs, their external bias. Practically, we see this in the extent to which human emotions and intellect are self-serving. Emotions, when devoid of intellect, are always self-serving. Their holiness has been completely shattered. Intellect, on the other hand, is, at its core, positive and helpful, and only becomes corrupt through bias. Alter Rebbe says that elsewhere.
Becomes corrupt through what?
Through bias. Bias, which we're all prone to. I mean, it's very hard to get away from bias. But again, in the pristine state, the tendency is like we can maintain purity in much more easily in our minds than in our emotions. Almost unsecular knowledge will contaminate a person unless, okay, so everything we said is true with a caveat, with an exception. Unless, what do you guys think? When is secular wisdom not contaminating? When are we not bringing our chokhmah, bina, dat that are so pure? Thank you, Hashem, you give us kochot to connect to you, to understand, right? And we're bringing them down. When can a person, yes, engage science, math, and not be contaminating?
I think there's 2 reasons.
Exactly. Yeah.
What did you say? One is for earning a living. They use it for earning a living, and the other is somehow connecting it to Torah.
Perfect. Both what you said is true. Beautiful. Ella im kein oseotan kardom lachtoch bahen. Exception is if a person is learning these sciences as a useful instrument. That is the lashon, right? As a useful instrument, as a tool. It's not an end in and of itself. It's a tool. Tahainu kidei So what are the ways that we could be, it's a tool. Again, we still have to mention La'avod Hashem. It's not enough that you're studying in order to earn a living, right? You're studying engineering so you can be an engineer. That's not enough. It's because you want to be an engineer. Why? So you can make a parnasa. Why? So you can serve Hashem, right? When it's for the sake of Hashem, everything is kosher. Or maybe there's even a more direct relationship between the study and serving God. You're actually using the study itself to serve God. For example, he uses mathematics to better understand the laws of sanctification of the new moon. Understand the laws of the sanctification of the new moon. Right? Not only the laws, but like the whole process, right? The Zeu Tamo, who are classic examples, right, that are brought here. Rishonim, right, medieval period, who learned science. Rambam and Ramban, right, Maimonides and Nachmanides. Zeu Tamo shel Rambam u'Ramban, zichrono levracha, v'si'atan she'asku bahen. Ken. The Rambam, Maimonides, and Nachmanides, right? They and their peers engaged in the study of sciences. They utilized the knowledge in the service of God and His Torah. Both of them are physicians, right? Both the Rambam and the Ramban are doctors. And Ken, Nachon.
We should end this with, it's extremely controversial. And really the ideas of Parnasa and serving Hashem they don't, in Crown Heights, they don't teach English.
Right.
At all.
Yeah.
In one of the yeshivas, and the other yeshiva in two. And
Yeah. The Rebbe founded Ahlei Torah, right, where the boys don't learn secular studies. Okay? But I don't know, because I never went to Ahlei Torah, nor did I send my kids there. I didn't live in Crown Heights. I know that here, Rav Ginsburg is very, 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 very into Chinuch HaTaharat HaKodesh. They have a beautiful way that they learn math. And it's almost like it's not even a secular subject. It's like they're studying Gematria. It's like they're studying Torah.
You can also learn sciences, like I was developing some curriculum with students about biological sciences and relationship, always referring to Hashem as the creator, what He created, what
Right. Yafa. Yeah.
complexity that He created.
Nachon. Yeah, I think that, like you said, Batya, thinking about a number of the aspects that we brought up in this chapter, we're eating. Everybody eats. We eat all the time, right? Like, why am I eating? And Chaimushka, and we're asking, do we have to, every second, do we need to be in, analysis every second? Yes and no, right? There are certain things that we can figure out for ourselves and we can know, right? Because it is finite at the end of the day, the realm of possibilities, how often am I hungry, what sort of foods do I want, and what is it? I can understand my process, and I can draw certain conclusions, or if I want to step into God consciousness. The same too with learning, the same